Hello YouTube, it's Dorian. Thanks for tuning into /. Now, I've been asked several times to review nixos, and I had a look at it a while ago, and because it's so different than the usual distro layout and how distros essentially work, I was a little apprehensive on getting into it. But I thought I would give it a try, and I've been using it for a few weeks now. While it looks like a typical distro with a standard desktop, there's a lot more going on under the hood. In this video, I'll cover what it is, installation, and a review of how it works and how to use it. So let's get started. First things first, let's have a quick comparison of how packages work. A package is basically an archive with files inside, like a zip file or a tar file, but it contains more information within it as well. This, for example, is what's within the GNOME Control Center package. It has a whole bunch of files that will be installed in different locations throughout the disk, and all these files are the package, whether it be a service or an application. A traditional package manager will download the package and extract the files where they need to go. Other tasks may be to restart certain services or make changes to various files or settings. The problem with this is if you upgrade a package, it will download the new package and then overwrite the old versions of the files. If for some reason one or more of the files only gets partially overwritten because of a power outage or a random glitch, then those files out of the package will be corrupt. Depending on what this file is, it can make that executable not run or the configuration file incomplete or invalid. This can then cause the other files that depend on it to not function either, and possibly make the entire package cease to function. If that package is a dependency for other packages, then you're going to get a domino effect and these also won't function. And this is a major problem if any of these affected packages are required for the system to boot up properly. And this is how the Nix package management is different and what makes it so great. The files on your hard drive where package files are normally found are actually symlinks. Symlinks are like shortcuts or pointers to the location of the actual file, which is stored somewhere else. So when a package is installed, these symlinks point to the real location of where these files are stored. This location is called the Nix store, which I'll demonstrate to you after the installation. As far as the operating system is concerned, these symlinks are the actual files. There's no difference. This is where the advantages of Nix comes in. In Nix, if you upgrade a package, the new package files will be extracted in a different location, which does not overwrite the previous version of that same package. Then all those symlinks are simply pointed to the new version of the files. This upgrade process creates what Nix calls a generation. This is also what you would call an atomic upgrade, and you can roll back and roll forward through the previous generations. If for some reason one of those files are corrupt, or one of the symlinks isn't created properly due to some failure, like again a power outage, then you can simply just roll back to the old files because they still exist by reverting back to an old generation. And then you can try running the upgrade again. This will leave your system fully functioning no matter what, because you can always roll back to a previous generation. But if the upgrade goes smoothly, you just carry on with the new versions, and then you can eventually have the old packages either manually or automatically deleted. And this can happen over and over again, saving as many previous generations as you want. The only downside to this is that it of course takes more hard drive space, which is why you should sometimes clean out the old generations. Now, this is a very simple breakdown of how it works, and I'll actually show you on the system where those files are stored and how they are kept separate from each other. But nixos is completely different. It takes the power of the Nix package manager and it applies it to the entire system. Just like I explained earlier, you have a package or packages that the Nix package manager will take care of. The Nix package manager runs inside of nixos, but it can also be installed in any distro such as Debian, Arch, or anything. It can be installed in any distro very easily by running a simple terminal command, and I'll cover that another day. Today we're talking about nixos. Now within nixos you have two ways to manage packages. The standard package manager acts the same as it will in any other distro you install it in, but will install packages for a single user to use. So different users can have different packages installed that won't interact with each other. And then there's the nixos configuration file, which is system-wide and is written in a functional language. But don't worry, it's not hard, and I'll go through it with you during the installation part. This configuration file will dictate what packages are installed on your system, what desktop environment, what applications, what bootloader, what services are running, and so on. And these packages are global for all users. This configuration file is the same one you will use for initially installing the system, as well as making changes afterwards. The great thing about this configuration file is you can set up your system just how you want it and then make a copy of it somewhere. Then you can put this configuration file into a new installation and it will install the same packages in a brand new system, essentially cloning the system that you had previously. This is also great for restoring your system should you want to wipe it and start fresh, but not have to reinstall everything manually. Using the same configuration file in multiple systems will ensure that all those systems have identical packages. And now let's get on to the fun part, and that's installing it. Now this is a little different than installing any other distro, and at first I was a little lost. I was, following the instructions, and once I realized you have your configuration file done, you can just reuse it over and over. You can change things up, and you can experiment without having to worry about wrecking your system. It made it that much more interesting to me because I can pretty much try whatever I want, and even if I mess it up, I can just roll back to my previous configuration and it'll work just fine. Like I've mentioned, you can use your configuration file, pass it to other systems, and reproduce it as many times as you want. So this is the NixOS website. There's a couple of things in here that I'm going to want to show you. One being, if you click on Learn, it has a lot of stuff on all the different things. Once you're set up and once you're in your system, you want to scroll down here and click on Nix Pills. So this is almost like little tutorials, little courses where you can follow along from start to finish. So you can just sit there and pick a subject and then hit next, and move along all the way through the complete tutorial of what everything does. You might not be interested in using everything. There's a lot of things where I'm not interested in it, but it has everything you need to learn the system and to get started and to expand on your system. What we really want here, though, is the big green download button. And like I mentioned earlier, you can install the Nix package manager in any distro, including the Mac, which is interesting, just by running this command. But we don't want just the Nix package manager, we want NixOS, the complete distro. There's a couple of options here. The graphical live CD, which is what I'm going to use, and it uses Plasma as the desktop environment. And then there's minimal installations. We're going to use the graphic one. It's just easier for several reasons. It has gparted, which if you want to use that instead of using terminal commands, you can graphically edit your disk, and you can also follow along on the manual, which if you click right here, it has the complete manual on how to install from start to finish, including some customization and everything, setting up your desktop, drivers, etc. So this is also on the ISO, which means as soon as you boot up the live environment, you don't need to even be connected to the internet to be able to go through the manual, which is great. Now I'm going to fire up the virtual machine. I already have the ISO mounted on the virtual CD, and we're going to enter the live environment. Here we are at the desktop. It does take a while for the live ISO to load. I'm not sure why. So if you're staring at a black screen for a little while, don't worry about it. Just let it finish and you're good to go. Of note, I'm going to just be covering installing on a BIOS system, just with an MBR partition. You can also install this on a UEFI system, but I'm going to cover that in a different video. I have another laptop with Debian and NixOS installed under EFI, dual booting, and it works great. But for now, just to keep it simple, we're just going to carry on with installation, getting you up and running. This works great in a virtual machine, by the way. If you want to test it out, see how well it runs, do all your configurations, and then you can actually copy your configuration file to a system that is running it on hardware to basically duplicate what you have in your virtual machine, which is fantastic. So you'll notice one thing here is that there's no install program, because it is manual. So you have gparted, the console, which is the terminal for Plasma, and then the nixos manual. So I'm going to open up the nixos manual and we'll get started. Now this is a virtual machine, which means I do have internet access through my host system. However, if you're running this on hardware, make sure your Ethernet is plugged in, and you can also load up your Wi-Fi connection. I can't do it here because it's a virtual machine, but you can connect to your Wi-Fi. That way you also have internet access. We can skip the first few parts of obtaining nixos because I already showed you how to do that, and go right into installing. It covers all the basics of booting the system, networking in the installer. You can click all these links whenever they pop up so you can get more information. And we're going to get to partitioning and formatting here. So this is where you're going to want to know if your system is UEFI with a GPT partition or legacy boot, aka BIOS, with an MBR partition. One easy way of doing this is using gparted as well if you don't want to use the terminal. However, the manual will show you all the commands to type in the terminal. So I'm just going to show you quickly what you could do with gparted, and we're going to do the terminal portion. Now again, this is a BIOS machine, it's a virtual machine. There's already a partition here. You can just go to Device, Create Partition Table. You're going to select MS-DOS for BIOS or GPT if you have an EFI machine. If you're trying to dual boot, this is when you would want to resize your partition, shrink it down, and create a new one. One of the things you're going to want to ensure you do is make sure the label matches what is in the manual. It will tell you certain things need to be labeled nixos or boot. Make sure you name it those. If you name it something different, just remember that when you're following these instructions. If you want to use gparted and you don't want to use the terminal at all, if you're wiping the system, just create partition, MS-DOS, apply. It will wipe everything on the disk. You can say new partition ext4 and name it nixos without a dot. Nixos. Hit add, hit apply, and then you're done. But I'm going to go terminal. I'm going to follow what the instructions say, and we'll do it this way. I've got a skinny terminal window here, so if you right click the title bar, more actions, keep above others, now you can follow the manual as well as use the terminal at the same time. If you're using UEFI, follow these steps, but we're going to skip that, and I'm going to do MBR. First thing you're going to want to do is do a sudo su, and now your root. So I'm basically going to follow through step by step all these instructions, and I'm going to kind of skip ahead so you're not watching me do all this, because basically just follow this and I will comment when I need to comment. So this line here in the terminal, if you're not aware of how parted works, you're creating a partition starting from 1 megabyte on the disk and ending before the last 8 gigabytes. This is so that you can add a swap partition. It'll leave you 8 gigs for a partition. This is optional. You can make the partition as large as you want. It's completely up to you. I'm just going to follow the guide, and we can always repartition afterwards. So again, you're seeing this minus 8 gigs. This is talking about the start is 8 gigs before the end of the disk, and you're going to take 100% of the remaining space. Beware typos. Control C and try again if you make a mistake like I just did. Primary. Done. And now we format our partitions and give them names. So I've done my root and my swap. For UEFI, if you would have followed the previous section up there for UEFI, this is when you'll be adding your boot partition. Now for installing, we're going to mount the root partition that we created. So disk by label, this is when you're going to use the labels that you created earlier. So if you named it something different, use that name. If you're using a UEFI system, you're going to also create the boot directory, and you're going to mount that boot partition into the boot directory. But because we're using a BIOS system, a virtual BIOS system, we skip step 2. Now we enable the swap partition. And then the next step, it says you need to create the nixos configuration file. Now this does it for you. Once it's created, Then we edit it and we do all our magic to tell it exactly what we want in our system. So nixos generate config, root, and mount, which is where we mounted our partitions. So you can see here it created the hardware configuration.nix and the configuration.nix. This configuration.nix file is the one where we're going to tell it what we want in our system. The next step, it says, is to edit that file. We go nano mount etc nixos configuration.nix. Don't forget the mount. If you forget this part, you're going to be editing the configuration file for the live distribution that you're running in now. Next, it's telling us for BIOS systems, you must set the bootloader grub device to specify which disk grub will be loaded into. For UEFI systems, you must set bootloader systemd boot enable to true. Depending on which system you have, it will generate that option for you. Now, just because you have a UEFI system does not mean you have to use systemd. In fact, on my hardware install, I did systemd to begin with, and then I changed it afterwards to grub, and it worked fine. Let's have a look at our configuration file and we'll start going through it. It's very well commented, telling you what you need to do. Here we have the grub2 bootloader section. It has enabled grub version 2, but one thing that you have to tell it is this here. If you uncomment this here, this is what dictates where grub will be installed. Make sure that the device is the correct one. If we open up gparted again, you could see the device is /dev/sda, and that's where we want to install it. Don't put a number. So that's set. Now we can scroll down to networking, host name. You can leave it as nixos. You can name it whatever you want. This is going to be your computer's name. You may want to enable wireless if you have Wi-Fi, but there's something else I wanted to show you as well, and I'm going to put a link in the description. I've put a couple of config files up on GitHub just for storage, and this is what I did here, these lines here, in order to enable Wi-Fi to function in the OS. These are things that you can always fix afterwards just by reloading the installer again, re-editing your config, and run the nixos installer again. I'm going to leave this disabled because it's a virtual machine. The rest of these you could leave for now. Networking proxy and localization. You're going to uncomment these lines to set your localization. To make sure you have the localization that you normally use. For me, it's just English US UTF-8. Then move on down to time zone and set it to whatever you want. If you Google it, there's a whole list of the continents and cities. So you could say America, Denver. There's lists of what you could set within Linux, depending on what time zone you're in. So just have a look at that and then set your time zone accordingly. This next part is where some of the magic happens. Uncomment this, this, and this. Now anything between these two square brackets here are going to get installed into your system, these packages, and they don't all have to be in a line. If you want to make it a little nicer to read, you can make it separate lines like this. So I'll go nano, Genie, and Firefox for now, just to get started. Next, we have SUID wrappers, which isn't really needed right now. Services that you want to enable. If you want to enable OpenSSH, you would uncomment this. By enabling something such as OpenSSH, not only will nixos install it, but it will also ensure that it runs. So these are quick little one-liners that will get things going. Firewall for now, you can skip. Print services with cups, we can skip. This is just to get you started here, so I'm not going to enable everything. I just want to get us to a working desktop. Enabling sound is another option you'll probably want if you're loading up a graphical environment. But if you load something like Plasma or GNOME, the sound is already enabled. But I noticed with XFCE, I had to enable this in order for the sound to work. Next thing is enable the X windowing system. So uncomment, so it's true. X server layout US, I can leave it like that. Enabling touchpad support. And enabling the KDE desktop environment. Let me just scroll this up a little bit here. So I can uncomment this, and it will install SDDM as the display manager, your login, and then Plasma 5 as the desktop. But there are other options as well, such as GNOME. So for here, you would put GNOME 3, or Pantheon if you like the elementary OS desktop. But for now, we're going to do XFCE, and I'm going to change the display manager to LightDM. The next step, and pretty much the last step you want to do, is create your users. Just uncomment all these lines, and then change Jane to whatever you want for your username, Dorian. Here you can also add other groups that you want that user to be a part of. So this and that. But for me, wheel is good enough. That lets you do sudo, and that's really all that I need. You'll notice one thing here, that I'm not setting a password. That's something that you have to do when you first boot up the system. Now I think this is good enough to get us started. To save your configuration in Nano, hit Control-O, enter, and then Control-X to exit. If we go have a look at our instructions here, it talks about doing some configuration with networking, file systems, etc. But I've done everything here in order to get a desktop going, installed Grub, a couple of packages, set our user, set the desktop environment, and the next step is just to run nixos install. So let's do it. And now this is why you want your computer online as well, this part coming up. It's going to build the entire configuration. It's going to start copying all the packages that you've requested onto the disk, and it's also going to download new packages from the internet and copy them into the partitions. And once it's all done, it's going to start building everything together. So you can see here, this part here is copying files from the ISO. This other part here is downloading from the internet. And once it has everything it needs, it's going to build everything and configure Grub. And then it's going to ask us for a root password, and then we're done. Now it's all done. Grub has been installed on SDA as we wanted, and now we set the root password. Installation finished. Now it's just a matter of shutting down, remove your USB or remove the virtual disk from your virtual machine and boot it up. We see Grub, that's always a good sign. And here we are at the login screen. But now don't forget, we didn't set the user password yet. So just quickly hop into the terminal here. If you're on hardware, just do Alt-Control F3, but for using a virtual machine, I have to use this. And then log in using root and the password that you set at the end of the installation. Then we're going to do passwd, the user that you set up, and then give that user whatever password you want. Hit exit, and then do an Alt-Control F7 to get back to the login manager. Now enter in the password you just set, and you get to your desktop. I'll just change the resolution here. And now we can have a quick look at adding and removing other packages. If you remember earlier in the video, there's two ways of installing packages. There's the Nix package manager and the configuration file. The Nix package manager installs things for the user, and the configuration file is system-wide. So let's start with the configuration file. You need to use sudo to edit this configuration file. Sudo nano etc nixos configuration.nix. Enter your password, and you're in the file. This is the exact same file that you created when we were installing it. And here you can make whatever changes that you want and then just rebuild it on the fly. You remember down here, I had set Nano, Genie, and Firefox as packages I wanted installed. If I go to my applications list, I have Genie and I have Firefox because I said that's what I wanted. So it's super easy to just tell it what you want and it installs it. Another thing with the users is if you want more than one user, scroll down to the user line. You can simply copy, paste, ignore the warning, and then change it to a different user. So I want a guest account, and I don't want it to be in any extra groups. I don't want it to be able to use sudo. So I'm just going to comment that out because I don't want them to have permissions to do anything. And at this point, you could even change your mind and come up here and change it to Plasma 5 and SDDM, or GDM and GNOME 3, and it'll just swap out your desktop. But let's look at changing some packages, because there's a couple of ways of doing this, and there's a couple of little tricks. For example, I of course want some theming, so I'm going to say arc theme, and I want some icons, so I will say Papyrus icon theme, and so we can stick with that for now. But how do you know what the packages are? Well, let's look at the other window here. In the terminal on the right, I'm going to use the Nix package manager instead of the configuration file, just to show you a few things. So the Nix package manager is nix-env. Some of the options which you can find in the man page or on the website are -q, which will list all the packages that you have installed as a user. I don't have any because I've installed everything system-wide. Now if we do that again, but we add an A, so we're going to query available packages, now I can just see if that package is there, and it's going to search. Now the QA switch when you're searching is a little slow. That is one of the downsides, but it works, and we'll see if this is available. So as you can see, indeed the arc theme package is available, and it'll be followed by a version. In this case, they used a date. Now, if you don't know the whole package name, like I like to use Whisker menu because I'm not a fan of this menu. I prefer using Whisker menu. If you want to search, you need to use wildcards, and they are a regex search. So I'll just show you. So you're going to do single quote dot star whisker dot star single quote. So whatever you put in here is what it's going to search for. So let's do that. So you can see here, XFCE4 Whisker menu plugin, just like any other distro, is available. So let's paste that in here, and then we're going to do Control-O, Enter to save, and Control-X. So the configuration file has been changed, and now we're going to rebuild it. So we're going to go sudo nixos-rebuild and switch to switch into the new generation. When I hit Enter, it's going to fail, and I'll tell you why after. So you can see here, it couldn't find this package, even though it does exist. If you go over here again, and we're going to add a P. So I want to see what the whole path is for this package. It's going to show you something a little different, because the XFCE4 Whisker menu plugin falls under XFCE, as you can see here. nixos.xfce.xfce4 Whisker menu plugin. It's the same with any GNOME applications or Plasma applications. You'll see it falls under like a parent. So let's edit that again, and I'll show you how it's not quite so straightforward. Now, over here, it's telling us it's nixos.xfce. However, it is not. It is actually packages.xfce. So whenever you see the beginning being nixos dot, just replace it with packages dot. Not exactly sure why. That's just the way it works when you're editing the configuration file. And once you remember, it's super easy to, just do this search again and paste it in, and you're good to go. And again, the great thing about the configuration file is once you have it set, you can save it and duplicate it. So you don't have to do this stuff over and over. You can just fine tune your system and then have it exactly how you want, and you don't have to change anything ever again. So we're going to again save it, and we're going to rebuild and let it do its thing. So now with the new packages that I've asked it to install, it's going to download them, install them, and then update Grub with a new generation that we can boot into. It's finished, it's updated the Grub 2 menu, everything is good to go. But before even rebooting, I can show you here. If I go to panel preferences, I'm going to do a bit of customization, go to my items, and I'm going to add Whisker menu. It's already there. I don't have to reboot. You probably should, because you can see there's the icon missing, but it is there. It does work as it should. And also I added the arc theme, which means I can go into my settings, appearance, arc darker, icons, papyrus, Window Manager, Arc Darker. So there you go. My themes are already there. Everything is set and I could start changing it right away. So let's do a little demo here. I'm going to restart. I would of course customize this a little more, but I want to show you Grub. So now having a good look at it here, if you go down to all configurations and hit enter, you'll see there is configuration 1, which is our initial installation, and configuration 2, which is the rebuild that I did that added those themes and whisker menu. So let's boot into configuration 2. Now, if you just pick default, it will just pick the latest configuration automatically. Log back in, and it's set just how I had it. Now at this point, we have a system up and running. You know how to add packages, remove packages. There is a lot more for me to cover, and I can't cram it all into one video. So there's going to be a part 2, maybe more, we'll see. More things that I need to cover are the user installations, the Nix store, how all the packages are kept isolated from each other, where they are stored, how all that works, as well as exploring the different desktops. I've shown you XFCE here and how to customize a little bit. We saw Plasma during the installation on the live USB, but there's also GNOME, which is my favorite, as well as the Pantheon desktop. So if you're an elementary OS fan or you just like Pantheon desktop, you might want to check that out as well. I'm also going to cover other things such as systemd, using UEFI, and dual booting. As I mentioned earlier, I have another laptop. It is UEFI, and I have Debian and NixOS on it, dual booting using Grub. So I'll cover that a lot more on my next video, so stay tuned to my channel. I'm really enjoying NixOS. I have a couple of installs here. I will be putting it on hardware eventually, but for now I'm just playing with it in virtual machines, and then I can copy my configuration file onto hardware and set it up exactly how I have it, which is fantastic. That's one of the things that I keep talking about that makes this so great. And this is very similar to Fedora Silverblue, the atomic system, how you can always roll back and nothing ever gets lost or unbootable. But this is a very different way of doing things, which I'm really enjoying. Another thing I wanted to point out here is in the next video, I'm also going to cover installing different pieces of software that are non-free, as well as Flatpaks, which you can do for sure in NixOS. I know I haven't posted in a little while, guys. I took a contract overseas to do some work, and I kind of got stuck here due to COVID. Not done yet. I had a lot of issues time-wise with a busy schedule, as well as the hardware that I don't have to work with here. So I got myself a headset. I've got myself enough to do some recording and upload the stuff to YouTube. But I'll be very happy to get back home and get back to my regular equipment and my regular setup so I can continue doing videos. But until then, I will make do with what I have now. Don't forget to hit subscribe. Don't forget to hit the bell so you get notifications when I come out with new content. And if you like the video, go ahead and click on like and share it on your social media. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to contribute to my channel to help me contribute to the Linux community, head on over to patreon.com. You can send me $1 a month. I'm more than happy to just receive new subscribers and likes on my videos. With that, a big thank you to my past, present, and future Patreon patrons. That's all for now, YouTube. Till next time, bash on.